The briefing room aboard the orbital station Concordia hummed with the polite fiction of equality. Its air was a carefully calibrated mix of oxygen, nitrogen, and the faintest trace of methane that the Cathar required. The lighting was a compromise, a soft amber that was neither the harsh white humans preferred nor the dim, infrared-rich glow of a Cathar warren. It was a room designed for cooperation, yet every line and shadow spoke of the vast, unbreachable gulf between the two species seated at the polished alloy table. On one side sat Major Elias Thorne. He was a man of average height and build, his dark hair cut short, his face a map of quiet lines that suggested observation more than emotion. He wore the simple gray fatigues of the Alliance Interspecies Cooperation Command, his posture relaxed but economical. He didn't fidget. He didn't waste a single motion. He looked less like a soldier and more like a patient cartographer, ready to chart a new and difficult land. Opposite him sat Huntmaster Xyler of the Skyshadow clan. Xyler was magnificent, a creature born of speed and violence. He stood a full head taller than Thorne even when crouched slightly on his powerful, digitigrade legs. His body was a corded mass of muscle, beneath a hide of mottled obsidian scales that shimmered like captured night. A short, bristling mane of dark fur ran from the crest of his skull down his spine, and his long, triangular head housed intelligent, vertically slitted golden eyes. Two powerful arms, ending in three-fingered hands with retractable talons, rested on the table. He was the product of 100 million years of evolution perfecting the art of the ambush, the sudden, shocking burst of terminal velocity. His culture, his religion, his very identity was built upon the concept of the Kazha, the glorious, honorable strike from the shadows. The parameters are agreed upon. Xyler's voice was a low rumble, translated by the disc on his throat into clipped, formal Terran standard. One target, the Glimmerhorn bioconstruct. Fast, resilient, a worthy quarry. The first team to achieve termination or incapacitation, as your delicate sensibilities prefer, Major, will be declared the victor. My hunters will demonstrate the Cathar way, the way of efficiency, the way of honor. There was no boast in his tone. It was a simple statement of fact as he saw it. The Cathar were the galaxy's premier predators. Their entire society was structured around the hunt, and their place in the galactic community was secured by the unmatched prowess of their warriors. This exercise, this gesture of goodwill with the soft, bipedal mammals of Sol, was a formality, a political necessity. It would be an education for the humans. Thorne offered a slight nod. The parameters are acceptable, Hunt Master. His voice was quiet, calm, and held none of the deference Xyler expected. It held a strange neutrality, as if discussing weather patterns. My team will consist of 3 hunters, Xyler continued, gesturing with a clawed hand to the 2 other Cathar standing silently behind him. They were younger, leaner, their golden eyes burning with the fire of proven youth. We will utilize stealth, speed, and environmental camouflage. We will stalk the quarry, learn its patterns, and execute the Kazha at the moment of our choosing. It will be swift, clean. He looked at Thorne, a flicker of something akin to pity in his gaze. And your team, Major? Just me, Thorne said. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The 2 younger Cathar shifted, their manes bristling slightly in a gesture of confusion. Xyler's golden eyes narrowed. 1. You will hunt a Glimmerhorn alone. The creature can sustain speeds of 80 kilometers per hour in open terrain. Its senses are acute. This is not a test of foolish pride, Major. I'm aware, Thorne replied, his gaze steady. 1 is all I'll need. Xyler studied him for a long moment. He saw a creature with no visible claws, no intimidating musculature, no fangs to speak of. He saw a soft, fleshy mammal whose primary evolutionary advantage seemed to be a bizarre stubbornness. The human's proposal was an insult, not to the Cathar, but to the very spirit of the hunt itself. A lone, slow creature attempting to run down a biological marvel of speed. It was madness. It was a waste of time. As you wish, Xyler finally rumbled, the sound deep in his chest. The display of futility will be instructive. We deploy to the surface of Xylos at dawn. May the great Sky Mother witness your efforts. He rose, a fluid monument of predatory grace, and swept from the room with his hunters in his wake. Thorne remained seated, his hands resting on the table. He looked down at them. They were not the hands of a killer, not in the way a Cathar would understand. They were the hands of a tool user, a problem solver. On the inside of his left wrist was a simple, faded tattoo, a stylized raven in mid-flight. He traced its outline with his thumb, his face impassive. The Cathar saw the hunt as a glorious explosion of power, a crescendo. They didn't understand. For some creatures, the hunt wasn't a crescendo at all. It was a low, single note, held until the universe itself ran out of breath. The plains of Xylos shimmered under the light of its twin suns. The primary, a yellow giant the locals called the furnace, beat down with relentless heat. Its smaller, white dwarf companion, the ghostlight, was only visible as a piercing pinpoint during the day, but would cast the landscape in ethereal silver during the long, cool nights. The air smelled of dust, of strange, pungent pollens from the rust-colored grasses, and the distant mineral tang of the iron-rich mesas that dotted the horizon. Xyler and his two hunters, Kale and Rorn, moved like whispers through the tall grass. Their scaled hides blended perfectly with the reddish-brown terrain. They were a single unit, communicating with subtle shifts in weight and the barest flick of their long, tufted tails. From an observation skiff hovering 10,000 feet above, their heat signatures were cool, disciplined blotches of blue and green against the hot red of the savanna. There, Kale subvocalized, his transmission a tight, focused burst. Northeast ridge, the Glimmerhorn, it grazes. Xyler raised a multiscopic viewer to his eye. The creature was beautiful. Roughly the size of a Terran moose, it moved on 6 delicate but powerful legs. Its hide was iridescent, shifting from bronze to green in the harsh light of the furnace. A single, pearlescent horn spiraled from its forehead. Its head was on a constant swivel, its large, dark eyes and flared nostrils sampling the world for any hint of danger. The biodata transmitted to Xyler's visor confirmed its peak physical condition. Heart rate low and steady, muscles relaxed. A prime quarry. "The wind is in our favor," Rorn hissed, his body already coiled low to the ground. "We can use the dry creek bed to approach within 100 meters. From there, the strike will be less than 3 seconds. "Patience," Xyler cautioned, though he felt the familiar thrill, the glorious fire of the imminent Kazha begin to burn in his blood. Let it become comfortable. Let it believe this day is like any other. The purest kill is the one the prey never knows is coming. They waited. They were masters of waiting. For 2 full hours they remained as still as the ancient stones around them, their breathing shallow, their minds focused. The Glimmerhorn grazed, moving slowly across the ridge. Finally, it lowered its head for a long drink from a small spring bubbling up from the rocks. This was the moment. "Now," Xyler commanded, "for the glory of the clan." They did not run. They exploded. In a blur of motion, the 3 Cathar burst from their cover. They were not just fast. They were a phenomenon of physics, a violent equation of muscle and will. The ground blurred beneath their powerful legs. 80 kilometers per hour. 90, 100. The distance to the unsuspecting Glimmerhorn vanished in heartbeats, but the Glimmerhorn was no simple beast. Its survival was predicated on sensing the impossible. It heard not the sound of their feet but the subtle compression of the air before them. Its head snapped up, water dripping from its muzzle. For a single, frozen instant, its wide, dark eyes met Xyler's golden ones. Then it bolted. It was a creature of pure flight. It launched itself down the far side of the ridge, its 6 legs pumping in a piston fury that churned the red dust into a cloud. The Cathar were close, so close. Xyler could feel the raw power in his own limbs as he stretched, his claws extended, reaching for the creature's flank. He was meters away, then a single meter, and then the Glimmerhorn did something unexpected. It leaped. Not forward, but sideways. A tremendous, gravity-defying bound that took it over a 10-meter chasm they hadn't seen. It landed on the other side without breaking stride and was gone, a flicker of bronze disappearing into a forest of towering, crystalline flora. The Cathar skidded to a halt at the chasm's edge, their breath hissing in frustration. Rorn slammed a fist into the dirt. "Cursed creature, a moment more!" Xyler stood, his chest heaving, the thrill of the chase curdling into annoyance. His internal temperature was rising fast. The exertion had been immense. They would need to rest in the shade, let their bodies cool. The hunt was not over, but the perfect moment, the Kazha, had been spoiled. "It is wounded by its own fear," Xyler said, his voice tight. It will not run forever. We will track it. We will find where it rests its head and strike when the ghost light is high. This hunt has just become more interesting. It was then that Kale, looking back across the plains, pointed. Hunt Master, the human. Xyler turned. Far below, emerging from the lander, was the lone figure of Major Thorne. He was carrying a light pack and what looked like a simple projectile rifle. And he was walking, not running, not stalking. He was walking at a steady, unremarkable pace in the general direction the Glimmerhorn had fled. He looked small and absurdly vulnerable against the vast alien landscape. What is he doing? Rorn scoffed. Does he intend to bore the creature to death? Xyler watched the slow-moving figure, a strange unease prickling beneath his scales. The human's pace was maddeningly consistent. Step, step, step. There was no art to it, no explosive grace, no honor, it was just movement. Plodding, relentless, and utterly pathetic, he dismissed it. The human was irrelevant. This was a contest between true predators and a worthy prey. The soft mammal would likely succumb to heatstroke before the sun set. Elias Thorne felt the heat of the furnace on his neck, a dry, baking pressure. The air was thin, the gravity a few percentage points higher than Earth's. He could feel it in his bones, a subtle weight that would wear on a person over time. He ignored it. He was a creature of calibration. His body was a machine he had spent 20 years learning to operate with maximum efficiency. His heads-up display, a simple contact lens in his right eye, overlaid the world with faint data streams. Heart rate, 72 beats per minute. Core temperature, 37.4 Celsius. Respiration, steady. Pace, 6 kilometers per hour. He could maintain this pace for a very, very long time. He wasn't looking for the Glimmerhorn, not yet. He was looking for its tracks. He found them easily at the base of the ridge where the Cathar had launched their failed ambush. The imprints were deep, splayed in panic. He knelt, touching the edge of one. The red soil was still dark with moisture from the displaced earth, fresh, very fresh. He stood up and began to walk, following the trail. He didn't run. Running was wasteful. Running spiked the heart rate, generated excess heat, burned through glycogen stores, and incurred an oxygen debt. Running was for emergencies. Running was for prey. He was not prey. His mind was a quiet space. He wasn't thinking about victory or about the Cathar. He was focused on the immediate. The track here, a broken blade of grass there, a dislodged pebble. He was reading a story written in the dirt, a story of terror. The Glimmerhorn had bolted northeast. It had put a massive distance between itself and the perceived threat. It would run hard for 10, maybe 15 minutes, and then, believing it was safe, it would slow to a trot, then a walk. It would stop to look back, listen. Its heart would be hammering. Its body would be flooded with adrenaline. It would be wasting precious energy. Thorne, meanwhile, just walked, step, step, step. Each footfall was deliberate, rolling from heel to toe, conserving momentum. His arms swung in a gentle, complementary rhythm. His breathing was deep and regular, in through the nose, out through the mouth. He was a perfect bipedal pendulum, a system designed by 4 million years of evolution for one specific, terrifying purpose: to never, ever stop. He took a sip from the tube connected to the water bladder in his pack. Not a gulp, just a sip. Maintain hydration. Don't bloat. His body was covered in a thin film of sweat, the single most effective cooling system on any sentient biped in the known galaxy. As it evaporated, it wicked heat away from his body, keeping his core temperature stable even under the searing eye of the furnace. To the Cathar in their skiff high above, he was a meaningless dot. To the Glimmerhorn, now miles away and cautiously slowing its pace, he was not even a thought. He was nothing, a slow, distant anomaly. But the story of the hunt had begun. The Glimmerhorn had made its opening move. A frantic, panicked sprint. Thorne had made his, a single, steady step, and another, and another. He was a continent slowly drifting. The Glimmerhorn was an island fixed in place, unaware that the world was moving towards it. The first day bled into the first night. The furnace sank below the horizon in a blaze of orange and purple, and the ghost light rose, casting the landscape in a stark, monochromatic sheen. The temperature dropped significantly. The Cathar, having tracked the Glimmerhorn to a small, wooded canyon, made their camp. They were predators of the hot day and the warm night. The cold of the Xylo's dark made them sluggish. They would rest, conserve their energy, and begin the stalk again with the morning heat. "The quarry is contained," Xyler reported to the observation skiff. "It is nervous, but it will settle. We will have it by midday tomorrow." "Acknowledged, Hunt Master," the neutral voice of the exercise coordinator replied. "And the human participant?" Xyler frowned. He hadn't thought about the human for hours. He toggled his view to the wide-field sensor display. He found Thorne's heat signature easily. It was still moving. "He is still walking," Xyler said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Correct," the coordinator confirmed. "His pace has remained consistent for 17 standard hours." Rorn let out a low chuckle. "His pride must be a thing of legend. He walks to his own exhaustion. Let him. It will not change the outcome." But Xyler didn't share the amusement. He zoomed in on the human signal. It was moving along the exact path the Glimmerhorn had taken. It wasn't a random, prideful march. It was a pursuit. A slow, ludicrous, and yet deliberate pursuit. Why wasn't he resting? The mammal body was fragile. It needed recovery. This behavior was illogical. It was inefficient. He watched the small, warm blip move through the cold, silver world. Step, step, step. It was like watching erosion. A process so slow as to be unnoticeable in the moment, but which, given enough time, could wear down mountains. The second day dawned. The furnace climbed the sky and the heat returned to the plains of Xylos. The Cathar were revitalized. They found the Glimmerhorn's trail easily and began their stalk anew. They were fast, silent, and deadly. Twice they got within striking distance. Twice, the Glimmerhorn's preternatural senses warned it, and it exploded into another frantic run, leaving the hunters panting and overheating in its dust. Each time they were forced to stop, find shade, and let their bodies recover from the massive thermal load generated by their explosive bursts of speed. The Glimmerhorn, too, was forced to rest after its sprints. The hunt became a series of frantic dashes and tense pauses, a galactic standard chess match of speed and cunning. Meanwhile, Thorne walked. He had walked through the entire night, his pace unwavering. He navigated by the stars and the ghostly light of the white dwarf, his eyes, adapted for color vision in bright light, aided by a simple night vision filter in his contact lens. He ate a nutrient paste from a tube without breaking stride. He monitored his body's data streams. When a blister began to form on his left heel, he stopped for precisely 90 seconds, applied a synth skin patch, and resumed walking. No wasted time, no wasted motion. By midday on the second day, he reached the canyon where the Cathar had rested. He saw their tracks and the tracks of the Glimmerhorn leaving in a hurry. He was 12 hours behind it, but the gap was no longer growing. It was holding steady. From the observation skiff, Xyler watched the data with a growing sense of intellectual horror. The Cathar's biometrics were a series of sharp peaks and deep valleys, extreme exertion followed by forced rest. Their core temperatures spiked dangerously after each sprint. The Glimmerhorn's data was similar, though its recovery was faster. The human's data was a flat line. His heart rate hadn't varied by more than 10 beats per minute in 30 hours. His core temperature was a perfect, unwavering 37.5 degrees. He was a biological machine operating at peak sustainable efficiency. The Cathar were trying to win a war with a series of brilliant, devastating cavalry charges. The human was winning it with logistics. "This is wrong," Kale muttered, watching the same display over Xyler's shoulder. "It is not a hunt, it is a pilgrimage, there is no fire in it." "You are mistaken," Xyler said, his voice quiet. He was starting to see. The brilliance of his own species' method, the Kazha, relied on overwhelming the prey's senses and reflexes in a single, glorious moment. It was an art form. This was mathematics. The human wasn't trying to surprise the Glimmerhorn. He wasn't trying to outrun it. He was letting the Glimmerhorn defeat itself. Every panicked sprint the creature made was a withdrawal from a finite bank of energy. Every moment the human walked, he was applying a tiny, almost imperceptible pressure. He was a debt collector who never slept. By the end of the third day, the Glimmerhorn was beginning to show signs of fatigue. Its sprints were shorter. Its periods of rest were longer. It had crossed half the designated exercise zone, a vast expanse of arid plains. It should have been safe. It should have been able to lose any pursuer. But when it stopped on a high mesa to scan its back trail, it saw him. He was a tiny speck in the distance, miles away, a heat-shimmering distortion against the horizon. But he was there. He wasn't a threat in the way the lightning-fast Cathar were a threat. He was just a presence. A thing that was always there, always coming at the same damnable pace. The Glimmerhorn watched for a full minute. The speck grew infinitesimally larger. A primal confusion began to war with its instinct for flight. This pursuer didn't behave like a predator. It didn't hide. It didn't sprint. It just came. Panicked, the Glimmerhorn bolted again, running hard for 20 minutes until its lungs burned and its many legs ached. When it finally stopped, exhausted, it looked back. And after a time, the speck reappeared on the horizon. On the fourth day, the Cathar abandoned their tactics. The Glimmerhorn was too skittish, its flight patterns too erratic. Xyler, his pride warring with his tactical sense, made a decision. They would use the human. "He is driving it," Xyler explained to his team, his voice tight with a strange mix of disgust and cunning. "Like a beater in the low-country hunts. He is a persistent annoyance that keeps the quarry moving. We will get ahead of them. We will predict the Glimmerhorn's path and set a final, perfect ambush. The human's bizarre ritual will serve our purpose." They used their speed to make a great, arcing loop, cutting across the plains to a narrow pass between two towering rock formations. It was the only logical path the Glimmerhorn could take to reach the more fertile lands to the north. There they would wait. There they would claim their honorable kill. Thorn, on the ground, noticed the Cathar tracks veer off. He paid them no mind. They were part of the landscape, part of the equation, but they were not his focus. His world had shrunk to the next footprint, the next breath, the next sip of water. He was in pain. His feet were a symphony of agony, his muscles burned with a low, steady fire, and his skin was raw from the sun and the chafing of his gear. He acknowledged the pain, he logged it, and then he set it aside. The pain was just data. It informed him of his body's state, but it did not command him. The mission commanded him. His mind had entered a state familiar to ultramarathoners and mystics. The conscious, chattering part of his brain had gone silent. He was pure process. His body knew what to do: track, walk, drink, eat. His eyes saw the path. His feet followed it. He was no longer a man named Elias Thorn. He was the pursuit. He was the thing that comes after. Once, during the long, silver night of the ghostlight, he stumbled, his exhausted body betraying him. He fell hard onto the rocky ground, his knee striking a sharp stone. The pain was a white-hot flash. He lay there for a moment, the dust in his nostrils, the chill of the air on his sweat-soaked shirt. He could stop. He could call the lander, concede the exercise. The Cathar would win. His body screamed for it. He pushed the thought away. It was a phantom, an illusion created by weakness. He thought of his training, of the old master who had taught him. An old man from the Kalahari, whose people had practiced this art for 200,000 years. "You do not hunt the animal," the old man had said, his voice like rustling leaves. "You hunt its spirit. You run until its soul gives up, and then the body follows." Thorn slowly, stiffly got to his feet. He checked his knee. It was bleeding, bruised, but not broken. He adjusted his pack, took a sip of water, and began to walk. Step, step, step. The rhythm was slower now, his limp noticeable. But it was still a rhythm. It was still forward motion. The fifth day was a blur of heat and dust and pain. The Glimmerhorn was clearly in distress. The biodata on Xyler's monitor showed elevated cortisol levels, a dangerously high heart rate even at rest, and signs of severe dehydration. It had stopped running in long sprints. Now it was a lurching, stumbling jog, followed by long periods of standing, head hung low, its iridescent hide caked with dust and dried foam. It no longer bothered to look for the speck on the horizon. It knew the speck was there. The knowledge was a weight on its soul. The fear of the sudden strike had been replaced by the horror of the inevitable approach. In the narrow pass, the Cathar waited. They had been in position for more than a day. Their bodies were rested, their minds sharp. The thrill of the hunt had returned. "It comes," Rorn hissed, his eyes fixed on the entrance to the pass. Soon the Glimmerhorn appeared. It was a pathetic sight. It staggered, its 6 legs moving out of sync. A thick, white lather coated its neck and flanks. Its beautiful horn was caked with red dust. It was an animal at the absolute end of its endurance. "Wait for it to draw level," Xyler commanded, his own body coiled like a spring. "The kill must be clean." The Glimmerhorn stumbled into the center of the pass. The trap was sprung. With a unified, triumphant roar, the three Cathar launched themselves from the shadows of the rocks. The Glimmerhorn saw them. It saw the blurs of black scales, the flash of golden eyes, the extended talons. It saw death coming for it in the way it had always understood death, fast, violent, and final. But its body, pushed beyond its limits for 5 agonizing days, refused to respond. Its legs buckled. It tried to leap, to run, but the signal from its brain found no purchase in its exhausted muscles. It let out a low, moaning cry and collapsed into a heap of trembling limbs and labored breath. It fell less than 10 meters from the Cathar's hiding place. They skidded to a halt around it, the climactic moment of their glorious strike stolen from them. The creature hadn't been felled by their prowess. It had simply stopped. It had just gave up, Kale said, his talons still extended, useless. The triumphant fire in his eyes had been replaced by confusion. Xyler stared at the fallen beast, at its heaving flanks and glazed-over eyes. There was no glory here, no honor. The Glimmerhorn hadn't even afforded them the respect of a final, desperate flight. They had been cheated. And then he appeared. Elia's Thorn limped into the pass. He was a scarecrow figure, his uniform stained with sweat and dirt, a dark crust of dried blood on his knee. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunk deep in their sockets, but they were clear and focused. He didn't even glance at the 3 powerful Cathar warriors standing over their fallen prize. His gaze was fixed on the Glimmerhorn. He walked up to the creature, his limp pronounced but his pace as steady as ever. He stopped beside its head. The Glimmerhorn let out one last, shuddering sigh, and its body went still. The exercise coordinator's voice echoed in their earpieces. "Target is incapacitated. Vital signs are failing. Cease the exercise. I repeat, cease the exercise." Thorn showed no reaction, no triumph, no relief, no emotion at all. He slowly unslung his pack and let it drop to the ground with a soft thud. He pulled a canteen from its side. Unscrewing the cap with deliberate, weary movements, he tilted his head back and drank. It was a long, slow draft, the water spilling down his chin and onto his filthy uniform. He drank for a full minute, the only sound in the silence past the gurgle of water and the harsh wind. When he was finished, he screwed the cap back on. Then he unslung his rifle. It was a simple, rugged kinetic weapon. He held it in one hand, and with the other, he drew a small, wicked-looking knife from a sheath on his belt. The Cathar tensed, thinking he was going to make a ritual cut on the prey. Instead, Thorn turned the rifle over, exposing the worn wooden stock. On it were a series of small, precise scratch marks, arranged in neat rows of 5. He found a clear space. With the tip of his knife, he slowly, carefully carved a single, new line into the wood. A tally mark, and that was it. He lowered the rifle, looked at the fallen Glimmerhorn for a moment, and then at the sky as if judging the time. The entire pursuit, the 6 days of relentless, agonizing effort, had been concluded with 2 simple, administrative acts: drinking water and making a note. The sheer, profound, and terrifying anticlimax of the moment hung in the air. The 2 younger Cathar stared, their warrior sensibilities utterly violated. There was no roar of victory, no honoring of the prey's spirit, no celebration of strength. It was just a task completed. There was no honor in that, Rorn finally spat, his voice thick with contempt. A death of 1,000 steps, a coward's hunt. Xyler didn't seem to hear him. He was watching Thorn, who was now checking his supplies with the same methodical calm. The Huntmaster's mind was racing, recontextualizing everything he had witnessed. He thought of his own species' reliance on the explosive, decisive moment. The glory, the honor. It was all a lie. It was a weakness. Their way of hunting gave the prey a chance. It allowed for escape, for a lucky leap, for a moment of hesitation. It was a contest. What the human had done was not a contest. It was a siege. He had not attacked the Glimmerhorn's body. He had laid siege to its biology. He had used the entire planet as a weapon. The heat of the furnace, the unforgiving terrain, the passage of time itself. He had weaponized patience. He had turned the Glimmerhorn's own strengths, its speed, its powerful heart, against it, forcing it to burn itself out. Xyler looked at the tally mark on the human's rifle stock. How many other creatures had ended their existence at the conclusion of that same, steady pace? He finally understood. Humans weren't predators in the way the Cathar were. The Cathar were a sudden, glorious thunderstorm, terrifying but brief. Humans were climate change, slow, imperceptible, and utterly, totally inescapable. "You are wrong," Xyler whispered, his voice a low, horrified rasp that made Rorn and Kale turn to look at him. His golden eyes were wide with a terrible, new understanding. There was no death, only the waiting. He looked from the exhausted, broken creature on the ground to the quiet, unassuming man checking his water supply. "That wasn't sport," he breathed. "That was inevitable." The debriefing back on the Concordia was a quiet, strained affair. The official report listed the result as a draw, citing that the Cathar team had cornered the prey while the human participant had driven it to exhaustion. A diplomatic solution that satisfied no one. The Cathar contingent was subdued. Rorn and Kale were sullen and silent, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Their pride had been wounded in a way they couldn't comprehend. They hadn't been beaten by superior strength or speed, but by a philosophy so alien to their own that it felt like a form of madness. Xyler, however, was different. He was quiet, but it was the quiet of deep, unsettling contemplation. After the formal session concluded, he sought out Major Thorn, who was cleaning his gear at a small workstation, his movements as precise and economical as they had been on the planet's surface. "Major," Xyler said, his voice softer than before. Thorn looked up. He had showered and changed into a clean uniform. The gauntness was still on his face, but his eyes were alert. "Hunt Master." "I wish to understand," Xyler said, foregoing any formality. "Your method. It is, I have no words for it in my own language. We value the swift kill. To us, a prolonged chase is a failure of the hunter, a sign of weakness. You embrace it." Thorn paused his work, wiping a cloth over the stock of his rifle, right over the fresh tally mark. "We call it persistence hunting. It's the oldest thing we know. Before we had good tools, before we had spears that could fly true, or bows or rifles, we had this." "But it is so inefficient," Xyler pressed, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "The energy you expended over 6 days was immense. My team could have hunted a dozen beasts in that time, had the quarry been less formidable." "You think in terms of one hunt," Thorn said, his voice even. "We evolved thinking in terms of one meal. For millions of years, on the hot plains of our homeworld, we were not the fastest. We were not the strongest. We didn't have claws or venom or armor. Most things could outrun us in a sprint. Everything could kill us in a straight-up fight." He leaned the rifle against the wall and faced the Cathar fully. "So we didn't sprint, and we didn't fight. We walked. We learned to sweat better than anything else on the planet, so the sun became our ally, not our enemy. We learned to walk on 2 legs, which is slower, but vastly more energy efficient over distance than running on 4 or 6. And we developed minds that could see not just where the prey is, but where it will be in an hour, a day, a week." Xyler processed this. A species of predators whose primary weapon was endurance. A species that had turned its weaknesses into its most profound strength. "We didn't need to be faster than our prey," Thorn continued, a distant look in his eye. "We just had to be more patient. We would pick one animal out of a herd, just one, and we would follow it. The herd would run, we would walk after it. The herd would stop, graze, forget, but we wouldn't. We would just appear on the horizon again. After a while, the herd would get nervous of this one targeted animal. They would drive it away. It would be alone." A chill, something no Cathar was supposed to feel, traced a path down Xyler's spine. The isolation, the psychological warfare of it. "And we would keep walking," Thorn said. "Through the heat of the day, when other predators had to rest in the shade, we would walk, our bodies cooling themselves. The prey would have to run, stop, pant, try to cool down. It never got a full recovery, we never needed one. Eventually, its muscles would fill with lactic acid. Its body would overheat, it would get heat stroke, and it would simply fall over. And then we would walk up and kill it. Not much of a fight at the end." He looked at Xyler directly. "It's not about honor, Hunt Master. It's not about glory. It's about a simple biological calculation. My ability to lose heat is better than yours, and my endurance is longer than yours. Therefore, if I just keep moving, your death is a mathematical certainty." Xyler stood in silence for a long time. Everything he had ever believed about the nature of predation, about the hierarchy of the universe, was being dismantled by this soft-spoken, medium-sized mammal. The Cathar hunted. The humans were a process, a geological force. To simply refuse to quit, Xyler murmured, more to himself than to Thorn, to make inevitability your primary weapon. Something like that, Thorn said, returning to his work. Later that cycle, Xyler stood alone in the station's primary observation dome. Below, the red-brown sphere of Xylos turned slowly. Beyond it, the starfield was a cold, indifferent tapestry. He called up a star chart, his claws tapping on the console. He found the designation for the local galactic arm, then the sector, and finally, the small, unremarkable yellow star listed as Sol. He zoomed in on the third planet, a swirl of blue, white, and green. It looked peaceful, harmless. He thought of his people. Their glorious histories were filled with tales of legendary hunters who could leap canyons and strike faster than the eye could see. Their culture was a monument to the perfect, explosive moment of victory. They celebrated the pounce. And here was a species that had risen to dominate its world not with a pounce, but with a single, unending step. A species that had looked at the brutal calculus of survival and chosen the variable of time as their own. They didn't need sharp claws when they had blistered feet. They didn't need powerful muscles for a sprint when their entire biology was tuned for the marathon. He felt a new kind of fear. Not the hot, thrilling fear of an equal opponent, but a cold, deep dread. It was the fear of the incomprehensible. How do you fight an enemy that does not care about winning the battle, only about being the last one standing when the war is over? How do you defeat a creature whose ultimate expression of power is to simply put one foot in front of the other again and again, forever? He looked at the distant blue-green marble on the screen. He imagined legions of these quiet, unassuming people, spreading through the stars not with a roar, but with a steady, relentless tread. The image of Elia's Thorn, gaunt and filthy, limping into that pass, was burned into his memory. The matter-of-fact way he drank his water. The simple, administrative scratch of the knife on his rifle stock. It was the most terrifying display of predatory dominance he had ever witnessed. Xyler, hunt-master of the Skyshadow clan, warrior and predator, finally understood the true nature of humanity. They were not the wolves or the lions of their world. They were the tide. They were the glacier. They were the slow, grinding erosion that wears down mountains and turns empires to dust. And all you could do was run, until you couldn't run anymore.